they can at disguising themselves as other Americans to make us hate each other. Because they know when we don't agree and can't even talk to each other, when it's not partisanship even, it's deeper, it's tribalism, then it makes it hard to do the things we even agree on. And so let me tell you the crazy thing in America that our politics doesn't reflect. We agree on so much more than we're getting done in America. We agree, 90% of Americans, 86% of gun owners agree on common sense gun safety. Yet here we are, a nation that is now sending our children to school with the implicit message that we can't protect you, so we're going to teach you how to hide. More shelter-in-place drills than there are fire drills. Here's another flash for you. We agree in this country that we are a nation. We say it in our songs that we're the home of the brave, but yet our veterans come home and they're disproportionately homeless. Republicans and Democrats agree we should be doing more for veterans. Minimum wage raising, even that is agreed to by the majority of Republicans. And guess what? Maybe Republicans in Washington don't agree with it, but even the crisis of climate change, most Americans agree we should be taking action. The next president is not going to win because they're going to be, winning is not enough. Beating Donald Trump, let me tell you, that's the floor, it's not the ceiling. It gets us out of a valley, it doesn't get us to the mountaintop. So let me tell you, how we get to the mountaintop. We get to the mountaintop by the president who can best inspire those ideals of unity. And I've had to do this my whole career. Heck, when I was mayor of New Jersey's largest city and presided over its biggest economic turnaround in 60 years, I had a Republican governor. He's my friend. I could text him right now. I could write a dissertation on my disagreements. Y'all never heard of my governor either. His name is Chris Christie. Talk about differences, but he and I found ways to get dramatic things done. I got to Washington, and the only major bipartisan bill passed under this president was the one that I led from the Senate with Dick Durbin for massive criminal justice reform called the First Step Act. So my mission has always been to bring people together across the lines that divide us to help us understand we have a common spirit and a common cause. And I'll end this answer with this one point right now. The test of our nation will never be how one party tears another one down. The test of our nation has always been and always will be how well we lift each other up.
Thanks, Senator. Now we have another video question. This one's from Sue Mason, and Sue is the wife of a 30-year Teamsters member and retiree of Local 728 in Atlanta, Georgia, currently residing in Florida. The issue is, of course, pensions.
My most pressing question to the Democratic candidates is how do you plan to shore up the multi-employer pension fund? My husband worked for 30 long years, 70-hour work weeks, foregoing pay raises and other labor incentives in order to secure a pension that was promised to us. Now we're seniors and they want to cut our pension. So we no longer have the ability to work those long hours and harsh conditions with our aging bodies. So my question is, how do you plan to fix it?
This is very straightforward, and it's insulting that we have to even have this conversation. There are ways to measure the soul of a nation. You look at how they treat their children. We have some real issues to talk about, from public education to prenatal care. You look at people that are in the shadows of a society. You look at people's prisons and who they incarcerate. We're this crazy nation that one of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are here in a nation that makes up only 4% of the globe's population. But God, one area we should be ashamed of ourselves is what we do to our seniors and our elders in this country. The very idea of this nation is that everyone should have dignity and security in retirement. Those people who were made a promise for pensions, and now we're a nation that isn't in a bipartisan fashion rushing to make sure we meet that promise, I'm sorry. This is something that I will fight for, go to the mat for, and woe be to you if I am the President of the United States and are going to stand in the way of doing what's right by people who earn pensions and are being held back or denied them by politicians who don't seem to get the values of this nation. So let me tell you very specifically. I'm going to tell you 3 things that I'm going to do as president, but there's a lot more, but I want to be brief on these 3 things. One is, I am an original co-sponsor of the Butch-Lewis Act, and we're going to get that passed. It's not complicated. We're going to get it done. Number 2, Social Security in this country has not kept up with the cost of living of retirement. We have millions and millions and millions of our seniors living in fear, insecurity, and at or below the poverty line. Enough is enough. Social Security has been a regressive tax where the wealthiest amongst us pay a far lesser percentage into that pool of Social Security. It's a simple way to fix it. I'm one of the leaders of legislation in the Senate to do that. It's for the wealthiest Americans, only affecting about 2% of us. You just raise the cap to get more resources, to extend the viability, and to expand the payments to people in this country. And now, this is important because security is, my mom turns 80 in a couple of weeks. And I watched her with my dad who had Parkinson's and Parkinson's dementia. At the end of his life, there are millions of Americans who are taking care of a spouse with special needs, a parent with special needs, a child with special needs, and it is hard. You bleed through your savings, your home, you're giving up your job or whatever else you might be doing to bring income in. It's physically a toll on you. I watched what my mom went through trying to take care of my dad. And we have this nation that says to you at the end of your life, the only way you're going to qualify for help is if you bleed through all of your savings, and that's when you qualify for Medicaid. Talk about stripping the dignity of somebody who played by the rules the whole life, and we're a nation that says, we're not going to stand with you until we drive you into poverty. And those people who have given up their jobs to take care of you, which, by the way, if they didn't do that and you ended up in the public sphere, it would be more expensive. So you're doing a service. And you're doing what reflects the soul of this nation. We need to have a plan that for those folks at the end of their life in that period, that we're a nation that stands for each other with those ideals I talk about all the time of grace and decency and love. And so the simple plan for me, I'm not playing around. This is very simple. Number 1, for Medicaid and Medicaid eligibility, we're going to raise the cap on how much money you can have so you don't have to go to poverty in order to do it. And then number 2, very simply. Number 2 is very simple. If you are staying home to take care of someone with special needs, that should qualify in America as work. And under my plan, we are going to make you qualified for the Earned Income Tax Credit, and you will be able to get thousands of dollars back as well to help support that most sacred obligation that we all understand, which is to take care of a loved one in their final stretch to see God. Thank you.
Senator, I work in the newspaper industry, therefore I cannot afford my own health insurance. I spent $27,000 out of pocket this year on health insurance, including a $1,400 a month premium and a $5,000 deductible from what is practically a monopoly in Iowa, Wellmark Blue Cross and Blue Shield. What are we going to do about it?
So, sir, first of all, I'm going to answer your question, even though you're offending me with that beautiful hair that you have there. Next time, I'm going to demand a bald moderator. I just want to be clear right now, because we've watched this now 5 times, I think, with the debates we're having amongst ourselves on health care. Democrats are going after Democrats. When I'm standing up there sometimes thinking to myself, wait a minute, the differences between us are small compared to what's going on the other side of the aisle, where they're trying to take health care away from us altogether. Take back the Affordable Care Act. Send us back to the days where pre-existing condition would make you barred from getting health insurance. And I want to tell you, there's differences between us, but Obama, one of his slogans was, yes, we can. The operative word there is we. This is not going to be an individual effort. The person with the loudest voice on their views is going to win. No, this is going to be the person that ultimately goes to the White House and has to get all the Democrats to agree with them to get anything passed, and maybe get some Republicans. And so I'm a big believer in a single-payer plan. I have to say, I think that's the best thing to do. But if you can't, please applaud that. I can argue that forever. But if we can't get all the Democratic senators on the stage to agree on it, getting all the Democrats in the Senate, let me tell you, is even going to be harder. And when my family members are telling me they're watching the debate stage, having anxiety like you do about their costs, it's not making folks feel a lot better. So let me tell you, the person that we need in the White House is the person that can build the coalitions necessary to continue to make as much progress, expanding care, lowering the cost, because I'm the only person in the United States Senate, only person in this race that lives in a community below the poverty line. I've lived there for 20 years, because when I came out of Yale Law School, my dad said, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot. Life ain't about the degrees you get, it's about the service you give. Get into America and make a difference. So I moved to one of our communities where I discovered right away we should never mistake wealth with worth. And my lived experience is my folks in my community who are desperately in need of help. Because he said $2,700. I know people that $27,000. In my community, $2,700 is the difference between staying in your home or not. In my community, people have to ration their insulin because they can't afford it, even though right up north here in Canada, it's 1/10 of the cost. The president we need is the person that every single day is not going to let progress be sacrificed on the altar of perfection, but build the coalitions necessary to do the things we can do as quickly as we can, getting as far to the goal as I want to get to, where healthcare is a right in America. And those things include, enough is enough. Prescription drug companies in America can no longer profit off of our pain. And I am going to take away patent exclusivity from those companies that charge one price in our country for a drug and a fraction of that price in others. We're going to use Medicare to negotiate down prices. We're going to do the things I know we can do more easily right away, which is lower Medicare eligibility to 50 years old. We could expand a public option. I thought with that hair, man, you must be 25. You got as long as the kids I'm seeing in college, for crying out loud. There are things we can do as a party united that when we look people in the eye who are afraid and worried about their families, we can say to them, follow me, we will get this done together. And guess what's going to happen? When we create a functioning public option or expand Medicare, people are going to get more and more confidence. It's going to make us even have more ability to go further and farther until we get to that day that in the United States of America, the land of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that you can't have liberty, freedom from fear, that you can't have happiness without health care, that you can't have life, that we become the nation that finally, once and for all, every single American, as a matter of a right, has access to high-quality health care.
Thank you.
I'd like to tell you this is a wig, Senator. It is not, but we would love to hear your closing remarks.
I really appreciate this. I just want to break it down real quick. I am here because of unbelievably courageous people who didn't necessarily pray like my family or look like my family, but they stood for my family. My parents were denied the ability to buy a house in the neighborhood I grew up in because of the color of their skin, and it was white folks that gathered together, and when my parents were denied a house, told it was sold, they would go right behind my parents, volunteering. The house I grew up in, they put a bid on the house, the bid was accepted, papers were drawn up, and on the day of the closing, that white couple didn't show up. My father did, and a volunteer lawyer. And then the real estate agent didn't give up. He actually punched my dad's lawyer in the face, sigged a dog on my dad. And let me tell you, as I was growing up, every time my dad would tell this story, the dog would get bigger. That's our story. When I got to be a senator, I did what a lot of senators do who have a high sense of self-regard. I decided to write a book. And when your name is Booker, that's a lot of pressure, folks. So I went back to find those people. That lawyer that organized the whole sting operation, I asked him, why would you do it? Why would you help black families move into your neighborhood at a time of fears of white flight, real estate prices going down? You were busy as heck starting a business. And he goes, well, the moment I made that decision, I was sitting on my couch in 1965 on March 7th watching TV. And he said it was a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg. That was when we had 3 channels, so most of America was watching Judgment at Nuremberg. And then they break away from that show to show a bridge in Alabama. Breaking news, a bridge called the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And this white man on a couch 1,000 miles away in New Jersey watches as these civil rights activists get stopped on a bridge by Alabama state troopers who gas them with tear gas and then beat them viciously. We know this day in our history now as Bloody Sunday. And so what did a white man on a couch 1,000 miles away do? Did he allow his inability to do everything about a crisis of civil rights to undermine his determination to do something? No. Did he forget that the knowledge of our country, that the power of the people is greater than the people in power? No, he knew he was one person, but that he was powerful. And so he stood up, and he knew he couldn't go to Alabama. He couldn't even afford a plane ticket. But he entered that great American tradition that has transformed this nation in every generation. He was one American that stood up and said, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have where I am. And he went to work, joining with other Americans in union, building a group of people, helping families move into a town. By 1969, he says, I get this case file of this family coming up from the South, looking for help, frustrated and discouraged because they can't buy a home. And he goes, Corey, we got them into a home. And the name on that case file that I got was Carrie and Carolyn Booker, your parents. I'm here because just one American didn't just sit there on the sidelines watching our democracy, but knew this was a time to fight. And the way we fight is not against each other, not to tear each other down, but the way we fight is to build new coalitions, to join with others in the highest ideals of the country. We didn't beat Bull Connor because we brought bigger dogs and bigger fire hoses. Hate can't beat hate. That man on that couch showed love. And so I want to tell you right now, we're in crisis. You all feel it. There's fear, and that doesn't mean you're not courageous. Courageous is knowing fear and going forward anyway. Let me take you to another time of fear and crisis. It's when a man named King was slain. And if you went to the Lorraine Motel today and saw that spot where he was killed, they put scripture down there. Now, I'm a man of faith, but this scripture doesn't speak to a religion. It speaks to our civic gospel. And the words there are the words that I want to leave you with as a challenge. God, it doesn't speak about a policy plan because this nation has never won with plans. It wins with vision that inspires action, that makes plans possible. These words I want to leave you with that I hope inspire you in your action, and I hope that you consider joining me in this larger American movement, bigger than an election. This is a campaign for our country. Those words there are written from Scripture, are the words of Joseph's brothers who were going to kill Joseph with his coat of many colors, dropping him into a well to die. They uttered these words and threw him into a pit, but he didn't die. He rose up to lead a nation through crisis. What were those words? To speak now to a nation with a pit in its stomach, where its values are on the line. The words were simply this, of Joseph's brothers, written where King was slain. It says, behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of the dream. What now will become of our dream? We have to answer that question right now. What will become of the dream of America? The dream that our ancestors died on, from beaches of Normandy to Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner dying in Mississippi. What will become of the dream that we fought for at Stonewall, at Seneca, at Selma? What will become the dream? Well, I say all of us need to join together in a chorus of conviction and say this dream will not die on our watch. That we too will dream America anew, and it will be like our ancestors, a defiant dream, a daring dream, and we'll back those dreams up with work and sacrifice and struggle, because without struggle there is no progress. We will back that dream up yet again with the most powerful force we know in humanity, and that is love. If we dream like that, we will not as a nation perish in the pit. We will rise. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Can I tell you, your eyes match your suit. They look great.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to the mountaintop. To the mountaintop. Thank you.
It's going well. You like it? Yeah. It's going well.
Yes, very.
Yeah, it's actually, I didn't feel nervous once Biden started talking. It was just
My
like,
mind was spinning on while Cory Booker was talking because he was going short, and I realized I needed a question. And
well, I have questions.
no, but I was.
Thank you, Senator Cory Booker. Wasn't he great? Very good. Our next candidate is Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. I know many of you know her. Born of union parents and a co-sponsor of the Butch-Lewis Save Our Pension Act. All right. And she fights constantly to save our Central States pension. Let's hear it for Amy Klobuchar.
Wow, what an incredible group. Thanks for having me. And should I say a few words at the beginning here, Art?
Have a seat.
Oh, you want to put me back?
You get your words at the end.
Okay.
You and I have something in common. My great-grandfather was a Teamster,
Yeah.
and you have a long family history
Right.
of union workers, and you have repeatedly touted on the campaign trail the importance of union workers. So tell the union workers why it would be important for them to vote for you as president.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank all of my friends here, the Teamsters. The Butch-Lewis Act isn't just a policy for me. I've lived it in my life. I've lived it because, as Leslie just mentioned, I wouldn't be here without unions. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines in northern Minnesota. But before that, he was a Teamster. And he had to quit school in middle school. His parents were sick, 9 brothers and sisters, and he pulled a wagon, and he was a Teamster. When he was in those mines, it was unions that saved his life. It was unions that made those mines safer, because my dad and my grandpa would always tell me about all the coffins lined up in the Catholic Church up there. Every month, someone would die from those mines, and it was unions that made them safer. My grandpa saved money in a coffee can in their basement to send my dad and his brother to a 2-year community college. That's why I'm such a big believer in those colleges. My dad then went on to the University of Minnesota. My mom, she grew up in Milwaukee. She wanted to be a teacher. Thank you, Wisconsin, but not the Packers. She wanted to be a teacher, and she came to Minnesota because they had strong teachers unions, and she taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. My dad was a member of the Newspaper Guild. So I am before you today as the granddaughter of a Teamster and a union worker, the daughter of a union teacher and a union newspaper man, the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, and a candidate for President of the United States. That is what unions are about. So when I look at these policies, and when that budget bill came over and everyone said, oh, we should all vote for it, I think it was Claire McCaskill and me, we looked at this thing, he said, what's this Central States pension provision in it? And it was bad. It was really bad, and we voted against that because that was in there. And then at least we now have a fighting chance to save the pensions with the work that's being done by my good friend Sherrod Brown, who so strongly believes in the dignity of work, and we are trying to push that bill to get done. I also believe that unions help everyone, and I am so proud that our staff is now organized by Teamsters Iowa Local 238. Thank you for that. And continue to work with our Minnesota Teamsters, who we're very proud of, quiet group in the front. Thank you so much for your supports in my last elections. It's really meant a lot. So I'd love to answer questions.
Well, Senator, I'm not real sorry that Iowa ruined the Minnesota Gophers' perfect season.
I would just like to point out, in addition to having one of the few teams named after a rodent, that the Gophers had their first season where they won 10 games since 1905.
Well, anyway, there's that. But we also have a video question here from Yulene Yurgain, and she became the first woman Teamster employed at Roadway Express when she started working there as a driver in 1966 as a member of Local 886. Over the years, she became one of the most active trade unionists in her hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And again, her issue is pensions.
My name is Yulene Yurgen. I am a member of Teamsters Local 886 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My question is, what will you do to protect my pension? Will you support Senate 2254? Central State's pension is due to become insolvent in 2025. There are two reasons this bill is important to us. Number one, it will save the pension of 400,000 retirees. And number two, it is the right thing to do. If you do the right thing, you will never be sorry.
Well, so I believe that promises that are made should be promises kept. And when you look at the original proposal there, it would have cut hardworking people who worked their whole life, cut their pension, people who were near retirement, 50, 60, 70%. And that's what was so wrong. So out of that, we pushed to have changes. And Teamsters organized town halls actually all over the country where there were a lot of people who were in Central State's pension. We brought the Treasury officials out there, they listened, and we ended up being able to pretty much break open the whole thing. So that agreement did not stand in place. The next thing that happened was that the Butch-Lewis Act was introduced, and I wish that Butch Lewis was alive today to see the work that we're going to do, because as president, I will get it done. We must make sure that people have their pensions, and that includes the Central State's pension, that includes minors, and we have to plan for the future as well for new workers, but we want to make sure as we do that by shoring up Social Security. I have been against all efforts to privatize it, by lifting the cap on where the payroll taxes are taken out of so we can keep it solvent beyond where it goes now, which is about 2034. It'll start paying out at 90%. And then we also must think of the new workers and give them the right to organize. We have this whole gig economy right now. 1/3 of our workers are in this gig economy. And making sure that they have the right to organize is going to be key, because I believe that unions, and this is all about misclassification of workers and making sure they're classified the right way, that unions make for a stronger economy. When unions are strong, our economy is strong. When unions are strong, America is strong.
I'm really confused about these teams. I'm from Boston, never heard of them. I just know Sox and Pats, if anybody from New England's in the house.
Okay, so,
No, so that's
my
not the question.
dad once wrote a book called Will the Vikings Ever Win the Super Bowl? It was in the early 1980s, and sadly it's still relevant today.
I didn't mean to have pain here. But, Senator, we have a question from the audience, and this is from Mr. Paul Wojner. Paul is Secretary-Treasurer of Teamsters Local Union 407 in Cleveland, Ohio, and he has a question about health care.
Okay.
First, I'd like to welcome Senator Klobuchar to this forum. Healthcare is the issue that I have, and healthcare has been an issue the last election cycle, this election cycle, and I'm sure it's going to be the big issue in the next election cycle. Most Americans believe that everyone should have a right to affordable health care. And while some of us pay $27,000 a year for health care, luckily the Teamsters negotiate contracts in many industries that offer high quality health care at little to no cost to our members. However, the quality benefits came at a price. Our members agreed to less wages to get better benefits. So my questions are, what policies do you support that would help raise the bar to all Americans without having to lower the benefits that our members fought for and won? And secondly, Since tax on healthcare would penalize our members for sacrifices that they already incurred, would you be in favor of the elimination of the so-called Cadillac tax on high-quality health plans?
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. I am a co-sponsor of that bill. I believe that we should eliminate that tax. That's first. Secondly, thank you, one person in the front. Okay, secondly, when it comes to health care, I think stepping back a little, you must have the right to collectively bargain. And what the Iowa Supreme Court did recently, which was really putting a rubber stamp on what the legislature did, is exactly the same thing that the U.S. Supreme Court did in Janus. And that's why, as president, I would make sure we pass Mazie Hirono's bill, of which I am a co-sponsor now, which guarantees the rights of public sector workers to collectively bargain. That's the first thing. The second thing, when it comes to health care, if you've been watching any of the debates, you guys been watching them, we keep having this same debate over and over. And I am the one from the beginning that said, I read the Medicare for All bill. I read it, and I'm the only member of Congress on that stage that is not on that bill. And I didn't get on it as well intentioned as it was because I read it. And on page 8, it basically says that people, 149 million Americans, including a bunch of the people in this room that are union members, would lose their current health care. And I don't think that's a smart way to go. What I want to do is this. I want to build on the Affordable Care Act. And let's remember that right now in this country, the Affordable Care Act is 10 points more popular than the President of the United States, Obamacare. So the way you do this, when you start seeing it as a beginning and not an end, you say, okay, how can we make this better? Well, you make it better with a nonprofit public option. That will bring down the premiums, and it's a smart way to do it, and it's what President Obama wanted to do from the beginning. The second thing we can do is take on the pharmaceutical companies. And I have been leading those bills from the beginning. They are things like getting rid of the ban on negotiation for Medicare. That would bring prices down for everyone, not just 43 million seniors. It is putting a cap on pharmaceutical prices. The bill over in the House right now that Speaker Pelosi is leading would save $350 billion for taxpayers just by taking the average internationally, bringing in less expensive drugs from other countries like Canada. That is a Klobuchar-Sanders amendment that almost passed. I can see Canada from my porch, in addition to Iowa, from Minnesota, and we see what those less expensive prices are. So those are some ideas, and I think if we just look at this, not taking away hard bargained health care, but instead making it easier for unions to organize, public sector and others, and I would do that, by the way, by passing the PRO Act, which would make a big difference for taking away the penalties and making sure there's no retaliation and making sure there's no misclassification. You combine those things with working on these issues with health care, and it's going to make it better for everyone, because you all know when you're a member of the union, you represent that union, and you're a proud member of that union. But you don't just help union workers, you help all workers. And thank you for that question.
Earlier, when you talked about misclassification in the workplace, this is a huge issue for union workers. I live in California. In that state, it's a very big problem, especially in agricultural areas. Rules like the ABC test that clarify when workers can be classified as independent contractors, et cetera, a lot of people support. Do you support that? And what other ways, if you were elected president, would you work to combat this?
Well, I think the thing you have to do is to make sure that our people can organize. And this is going to be battled out in the courts. And why it's so important who the president is the president appoints the attorney general. And the attorney general is going to decide what kind of cases to proceed on. And the president will have a lot of say in what these rules are with the Department of Labor and who is appointed to the National Labor Relations Board. All of that is important. There's a lot of things that work together here, but the key is to make sure that people can organize. Right now, as I mentioned, a third of our workers are in this gig economy. They're working part-time, and a lot of them are being abused, actually. They're putting them part-time, they're combining jobs, and they don't have access to benefits. So by allowing them to organize, you change everything for them, because then they're going to have access to the kind of health care negotiations and the kind of child care negotiations and things we want to have in place. The other thing I would do is take some of these tax breaks that the president gave to big corporations and to wealthy people, and I would use that money to help regular people. You can do that with child care. The proposal out there, it takes 150% of the median income, right, average income, and it says if you make less than that, then you shouldn't have to pay more than 7% of your wages for child care. And if you do, the rest of that, the government will help you with that. That helps the whole economy. Those kinds of proposals will help people, whether they're in the union or not, but it's going to make sure that those workers in the gig economy are helped and that they are able to get retirement and are able to get Social Security and things like that. So I really think we have to step back and look at this economy, make sure we're protecting the people who worked hard, that's what the Butch Lewis is about, so they can get their benefits, but then also make sure that we're thinking ahead. And right now, unions are on the rise. If they weren't, I couldn't say 4 good words for you. Former Governor Scott Walker. Unions, thanks to Jim Hoffa's work and your leadership and so many people in this room on the front line, unions have become more popular because people have figured out that their lives get better when unions are out there and that they feel isolated and no one's going to stand up for them. And certainly that guy in the White House, despite what he promised people, and there were a lot of members of a lot of unions that actually voted for him because they thought, oh, he's going to get this done. He's going to make things cheaper for me. He's going to do that stuff. Those were false promises. And that's one of the cases that, yes, I will make, but I'm asking you to make it too, because they're going to listen to you. And they're going to hear about the kind of judges he's put in place that have been against union rights and the kind of policies that he's put in place that have hurt the ability to organize and the kind of people he's put on the NLRB and the kind of person he just put on in charge of the Labor Department. You're going to have to make those cases because while a lot of money has gone up to the top, there has not been shared prosperity in this country, and he has betrayed the people he made those promises to.
Thanks, Senator. You favor important changes to Taft-Hartley, the father of all modern anti-labor legislation. Isn't it time to get rid of Taft-Hartley like Harry Truman wanted to do?
That would be one way.
If not, why not?
Okay. Well, what I think we have to do is make sure we have the right to collective bargain and that we make sure we put these provisions in all of our government contracts and then we make clear that there is protection for our workers. My one experience in a big way with this was some of the prevailing wage laws, and that was when I had the job before the one I have now. I was county attorney, and I had the biggest county in Minnesota, right, over 1 million people. And I put a full-time person on prevailing wage because you can have all the laws you have on the books, whether they're good or bad, but if you don't enforce them in the way that helps workers, it doesn't matter. I put a full-time lawyer on that to make sure that we were enforcing it. And then that lawyer helped counties all over our state because a lot of the small rural counties aren't able to hire someone to do that full time. That was the kind of precedent I set, and I will continue to support these labor laws that are allowing for collective bargaining and that we make sure these government contracts, when we give them out, they're fair and they go to union workers.
And would you like to give us a closing statement?
Well, I
please?
would. You look so cheery in your bow tie, Art.
I love you too.
I want to start with this. I'll start with kind of I know there's been some dramatic speeches here, but a holiday story. And that is a story about my daughter. My husband's out there somewhere. I don't know where he went. But when our daughter was about, I think, 8, 9 years old, we went to see that movie Polar Express. And maybe some of you remember that movie. Tom Hanks was in it. He played the conductor of this train. And our daughter walks out of it and she says to me, Mom, there's one thing in that movie that wasn't true. And I say, what was it? Was it when the train went over the big lake and it froze over immediately so the train could keep going? She goes, no, that wasn't it. And I said, well, was it the million elves that were up at the North Pole? No, that wasn't it. And I said, what was the thing that wasn't true? She said, well, it was when that conductor, who was Tom Hanks, is standing on the train at the end. And the little kid comes over, and Tom Hanks looks at the little kid, and he says, come on, kid, get on the train, get on the train. And the kid's hesitating, and then the conductor says, it doesn't matter which way the train is going, just get on the train. True story, she looks at me and she says, Mom, that's not true. It does matter which way the train is going. That is a good lesson for this election. It matters which way the train is going. Look at what Donald Trump has done. He went down to Mar-a-Lago after that tax bill was signed. He went down there and he said to his friends, I just made you a lot richer. You just got a lot richer. We cannot forget that. And you, as ambassadors to all these working people that you see every day, you got to tell them that, because they've got to see that that's where his head is, and that's what he did. I will come in this in a much different way as president. You know I know the policies. I passed over 100 bills as the lead Democrat in that gridlock of Washington, D.C. And I did it because I was able to work with people and figure out how to get things done. That's going to be important. But the most important thing is going to be to win. Because, yes, this is a matter of economics. And all these things we want to do, from the Butch-Lewis Act to bringing down the cost of pharmaceuticals, to putting those labor protections in place, to making sure we're standing up for workers and standing up for people in the rural areas, we're not going to be able to do that unless we win big. And the way we win big is not shutting people out with policies that they don't support. How we win big is bringing them with us in a big, big way. It is to remember that we must have an optimistic economic agenda for the people of this country. And I've got proof. We won in Wisconsin, the governor's race. We won in Michigan. We won in Pennsylvania after we lost in 2016, because we put up candidates that went there not just where it's comfortable, but where it's uncomfortable. We just won in Kentucky and Louisiana. We won. Mitch McConnell, and don't tell me we can't win the Iowa Senate race if we won in Kentucky and Louisiana. We won despite the fact that Donald Trump went down there and did a rally with the opponents of the Democrats the night before. My question is, where can we send him next? That is what happened. We won. And so that's what I don't want us to forget here. This is an economic check for working people. But this is also a patriotic check. This is a values check. This is a decency check. I have won every race, every place, every time. Every congressional district, the reddest of red, Michelle Bachmann's, the district that borders Iowa, and I've done it by bringing people with me. I've done it because I've listened to those workers and those steel workers in northern Minnesota. And we don't want to eke by a victory at 4 in the morning. Then we are not going to be able to get this bill passed, and we're not going to be able to get these workers' rights. We've got to win big. And so that's what I leave you with. Think about going with someone that has that proven track record of standing with unions, yes, of getting things done, yes, but also of winning big. Literally every race, every place, every time, all the way down to 4th grade. When my slogan that I've since discarded, all the way with Amy Kay. I'm not going to use that one. I don't think it's a good idea, but what I will use is this. that this is something former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan once said this. She said, what America wants is something quite simple. They want a country as good as its promise. If we remember that and we go with decency and we think big and we have big values, we win. So let's go out there and get it done, and I would love your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. I'll grab the mic. Good luck to you.
Wasn't Amy great? Very good. Enjoyed her. Always great. We're so fortunate to have so many good candidates speaking out on our issues. Our next candidate is Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana. Mayor Pete is new to the national stage, but he's speaking out on our issues. He's a Navy veteran and a Rhodes Scholar. Let's give him a big hello. Come on. Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Mayor Pete, thanks for coming back to Iowa. You're practically living here right now.
Starting to feel that way.
All right. And there's a whole lot of Teamsters in the House today who want to know why they should vote for a guy named Buttigieg.
Sounds good. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. I bring greetings for our Teamsters in South Bend, everybody who is plowing snow and picking up leaves and taking care of our parks and making our city a livable place. We got a lot of Teamsters right in our administration, and we're thankful for them. So I want to make sure, first and foremost, that you know that I stand with organized labor in order to build up an economy that actually works for us. Not just when the stock market's looking good, that's nice, but actually making sure that one job is enough, actually making sure that working conditions meet our expectations, and building up middle class in this country. If you start the clock right around the time I was born, you see two things happening. One thing you'll see is that inequality increases dramatically in the United States. The other thing that you'll see happening is an assault on organized labor and declining union membership. I believe those two things are not a coincidence. They happened at the same time for a reason. And the time has come, as I have proposed in our new Rising Tide economic agenda, to make sure that we support and expand not just better wages, making sure that $15 is the floor for the federal minimum wage across the United States, but also support the right of workers to organize for better pay, for better conditions, and that we support not just how you can unionize, but who can unionize. There's a lot of gig workers out there right now. As far as I'm concerned, if you're doing a gig, you're doing work. If you're doing work, that makes you a worker. And if you're a worker, you ought to have a right to organize, and you ought to have labor protections that go with that. I come from the exact part of the country that this president pretends to speak to and for. I live in the industrial Midwest, just about, I don't know which way's east, but just about 7 hours. One guy's pointing that way and one of you is pointing that way. So is that way? Okay, well, wherever it is, it's not that long of a drive up I-80 to get to where I am. And I have seen what our communities are up against in different parts of this country because we no longer have a system economically or politically that works for us. I also know what we're up against as a country in the sense of the need to come together. I'm running not only to bring an end to the current presidency, but to launch the era that's going to come next. If you just stop and picture what it's actually going to be like the first day that the sun comes up and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States, it's a good picture. We're looking forward to that day. We're ready for that day, but think about what it'll actually be like. Think about how divided our country will be, even more torn up over politics than we are right now. That means we're going to need a president who can solve big problems to empower workers and enhance the life of this country and prepare us for the future. And do it in a way that actually starts healing and unifying this country rather than further polarizing it. I am running to be that president because that's what we're going to need from the White House come January 2021.
Thank you.
We have a question from our audience, Mayor Pete. And this question is from Dan Beam. Dan is a 23-year Teamster of Local 554 in Omaha, Nebraska. He works for Highland Dairy there. He has a question about pension protection, specifically BLA from CS Active perspective. And where is our audience member?
Luke.
Dan?
I've been called worse than damn. I'm a Teamster with Local 554. I'm honored to be here today with my union brothers and sisters. I'm 58 years old and was born and raised in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I still live there. I've been employed in a dairy processing plant for the last 23 years. I joined the Teamsters Union as soon as I was eligible. I've forgone pay raises in contracts to receive increased contributions to my retirement fund. I've hoped to retire at age 62, a short 4 years from now. As you know, the Central States Pension Fund is projected to be insolvent at about the same time. I have no desire to work until I die, and I'm certain the other 400,000 active and retired workers who have invested in the Central States Pension Fund feel the same way. My question is, what is your plan to address the pension crisis and restore retirement security for American workers?
Thank you. So the bottom line is that you deserve to know that the promise made to you will be kept, because that was a two-way promise. As you said, often there was a trade-off between a pay raise and putting into the pension, which means it ought to be there for you, and that's not about doing you a favor, that's about keeping a promise. Now, right now, the Butch-Lewis Act has been designed to make sure that we secure and support multi-employer pensions, and I support that legislation. I also support the broader idea that our country has a responsibility to make sure that everyone can retire with security. Even for those who are not fortunate enough to be represented by a strong union and to have the benefits of some of those negotiated pension plans, we have to begin by making sure that Social Security is there for all of us. And this president talked a lot about caring about Social Security, only to turn around and have a budget that took funds away from it. That's unacceptable. And don't listen to anybody who says that there's no way to keep Social Security solvent without cuts. It's just not true. As long as we're willing to raise revenue by things like collecting those payroll tax dollars past $250,000 incomes and up. If we do that, and a couple other tweaks that do not involve cutting benefits, then the Social Security fund will at least be solvent to where I'm planning on collecting on it and beyond. So we got to do that. I also believe we ought to set up a public option 401k in the United States, eligible for everybody to participate. Healthcare is not the only place where a public option could do a lot of good. And so we're proposing at any employer you would be able to get it. It probably won't be as strong as the pension program you're participating in that we must protect. But for those not as fortunate, we got to make sure that we create another alternative, and we would have employers matching 2-to-1 what employees put in. The last thing I want to mention, just as we contemplate more and more Americans retiring and aging into the need eventually for long-term care, is that we have got to do something about long-term care in this country. I remember a conversation with a social worker in the hospital when my dad became ill. And the social worker explaining to my mom at a period when we thought that he might need long-term care, that the best answer would be to spend herself into poverty so that family would qualify for Medicaid. And thinking, is that how things work in the United States of America? So I'm proposing Long-Term Care America, a cash benefit for anyone who is eligible, who needs those expenses covered, $90 a day, which would go a big part of the way toward the cost of long-term care, and making sure that we continue to enhance opportunities for care and aging in home and not just in institutions, which Medicaid and Medicare often push folks into. So I know that's a long way from your horizon, but I just want to mention it as another retirement-related thing that deserves to be taken seriously. In addition, of course, ending where we began, to making sure that multi-employer pensions are secure and rock solid for the future. Next.
Mayor Pete, you've proposed guaranteeing bargaining rights for all American workers. And if you are successful in achieving that, if you are elected president, how do you believe it would transform America's workforce and America's economy?
Well, I believe it's crucial to making sure that the economy actually works for us. Think about it this way. We generally look at manufacturing jobs as some of the best, most precious jobs we need to make sure we grow in our economy, right? They're good jobs. But we didn't used to think of them as good jobs. 100 years ago, manufacturing jobs were generally considered dirty, dangerous, and underpaid. They became good jobs when workers got together, organized into unions, and demanded that they become good jobs with good pay, safety, and good benefits. This must now be done for other kinds of jobs where you don't see that kind of representation. I'm thinking about home health care workers. I'm thinking about fast food workers. We were with fast food workers a few days ago in Charleston who were fighting for their right to $15 an hour in a union. I'm thinking about a lot of farm workers who don't have the ability to organize. Not to mention what they're doing to public sector workers, whether it's here in Iowa or in a lot of other places, which is why I support the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act. It makes our economy actually work for us instead of looking good just as numbers on a page. I would also argue, as somebody who, as a mayor, oversees a workforce that is represented by organized labor, including by Teamsters, that it also makes the employers better off because you are able to sit across the table, hear the voice directly of workers and what concerns them, and earn the loyalty and the retention of a workforce that knows they're going to be taken care of. And so I believe that our employers, our companies, our government units, as well as our workers, benefit when we make sure that that right to collective bargaining and to organizing is available to all.
Mayor Buttigieg, we have a video question here from Josue Alvarez, a 26-year-old resident of Bell Gardens, California. His parents immigrated to the United States from El Salvador before he was born in search of a better future. Josue has worked for XPO Logistics as a port truck driver at the ports of LA and Long Beach for 3 years. As a victim of misclassification, where drivers are classified as independent contractors by companies, denied benefits and the ability to organize, but treated like employees. Josue hopes to see action on the federal level. So his question is about worker misclassification.
Hello, my name is Josue Alvarez. I'm an XPO driver. I've been an XPO driver for about 3 years already. For the last 3 years, XPO has been stealing my wages, claiming that I'm an independent contractor. But in reality, I'm just another misclassified driver. I don't have any health insurance. I don't have any vacation days. I don't have any sick days. I don't have any work compensation. I don't have any disability. We, our coworkers, we had tried to form a union, but we keep being turned around by XPO, telling that we're independent contractors, but we cannot bargain for better pay rates on the loads. We cannot we cannot haul other loads from other companies. And with the little wages that we get, we have to pay for our diesel, we have to pay for our tolls, maintenance on the trucks. We have to pay for our tires. We have to pay for many other things that have to do with that XPO, like big corporation like XPO, should be paying for. Now in California, we have fought to see that AB 5 and SB 1402 pass, and now we have a little hope that government's going to be taking on misclassification And now my question is, when you become president, what will you do to take on misclassification? What will you do to corporation like XPO to be enforced the law that they keep breaking every single day?
Great. Yeah.
So Josue is asking, he's talking about misclassification of drivers and that they don't have workman's comp, they don't have disability. They tried to form a union, but they were misclassified, so they couldn't be. And Josue's question is, when you become president, what will you do to take on misclassification? What do you do to a corporation like XPO to enforce the law that they keep on breaking every single day? Thanks.
Great. So first of all, when a company is breaking the law when it comes to labor, whether it is misclassification, interfering with union elections, not offering equal time on company time, or whatever interference it is, there need to be penalties that have enough teeth, multi-million-dollar penalties, that they actually care. Because what's happening right now is not only are they not getting enough enforcement, because we don't have enough enforcement energy and resources, whether we're talking about NLRB or whether we're talking about Department of Labor. But even when there is enforcement, even when there's a finding that a company's been in violation, the fine doesn't have any teeth, and so they just keep doing the same thing. That will end when I'm president. The penalties will be harsh enough to make them change their action. That's number one. Number two, workers like Josue deserve these kinds of protections. And what we're seeing is not just illegal misclassification, but a lot of cases where workers are being described as a 1099, a contractor, not an employee, by companies that functionally control everything about their working experience. And so we need to adopt what's called the ABC test that basically says if somebody controls your work experience, your pay, your working conditions, and you're doing something that's part of their business, then whether you call them, whether you put them on a 1099 or not, you're considered a worker, and they have to extend those protections and those labor rights to you. It takes away that magic between being a so-called contractor and being an employee. And as we move into the changes in the economy ahead, I would argue we also need to think about how to not only take away some of that magic that makes them want to call people contractors, but look at the full-time, part-time line too. Because this is part of why I think we've got to do things differently with gig workers. As far as I'm concerned, if you're driving an Uber 9 hours out of a week, then 9 divided by 40 is how much that ought to go into your sick leave, your vacation, your ability to get benefits across the board. And we will set things up in order to make sure that benefits aren't just portable, they're prorated, so that it takes away these incentives for companies to push people into a kind of work where they're not able to get the benefits that we consider to be basic to what it is to be a worker in our economy.
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked to each other a few times here in Iowa, and I appreciate your time. And I'm not that bad a guy, really. Do you think that a free press in America is the enemy of the people?
I do not, and I'm not just working the ref on this. This is really important. How's the United States supposed to be a force for freedom and democracy around the world if our own president echoes the language of dictators in describing reporters as the enemy of the people anytime they reveal a fact that is inconvenient to the president? A democracy rests on a press. I don't always like what's in the press. I don't always like the way I'm covered, but I'll tell you this too. If we ever catch a reporter saying something that's factually incorrect, and we call them and we can prove it, they fix it. Because the press cares about the truth, just like the American people care about the truth. And coverage, whether it is favorable or unfavorable, the freedom of that coverage is the bedrock of American society and deserves to be honored and protected by the American president as it is under our Constitution.
Thank you.
Over the last 40 years, while worker productivity has actually increased 70%. The hourly pay of typical workers has remained essentially flat. So what would you do to help change that if you were elected president?
Glad you raised that, because we're in a moment where a lot of things are changing in the economy. A lot of things are very complicated about the future of the economy, and because some of those conversations get complicated, they have distracted us from the central problem in our economy, which is so abundantly simple that it is almost blindingly obvious, and that is this: people don't get paid enough in the United States of America. It is that simple. A lot of other stuff we can talk about and should, but let's begin with this. Certainly that's true of the minimum wage. The minimum wage is worth less in real dollars, if you allow for inflation, than it used to be, by quite a bit. And in not one county in the United States of America can somebody on minimum wage easily afford a 2-bedroom apartment. But this isn't just about the minimum wage, which needs to go up to 15. This is about wages across the board, because as you pointed out in the question, the wealth is there and it's being created by workers. The productivity of our economy grew enormously over the course of my lifetime, and shockingly little of that has gone to the workers who are actually generating the value. And this is not the result of some mysterious cosmic force of macroeconomics. Yeah, there's technology, yeah, there's globalization, you bet. But let's be very clear. This is the result of policy decisions. This is the result of political decisions, beginning in the Reagan era, that have disempowered workers and their ability to command more of the fruits of their labor. That will change, it must change, and it's one of the things that's at stake when I say that we must commit ourselves to a goal of doubling the rate of participation in organized labor in this country.
If elected president, and if the Bush-Lewis Act ends up on your desk, would you sign it and why?
Yes, I support it for the reasons that we shared earlier about what we've got to do to make sure that pension obligations entered into in good faith by workers are protected. And that's part, as I shared earlier, of the bigger picture of how we make sure that we have retirement security in this country. This country is headed for a crisis if we don't do something to make sure that everybody knows that they will age into a prosperous, dignified, safe, and secure retirement.
Does that include repealing Taft-Hartley?
We definitely got to change Taft-Hartley. And by the time I'm done with it, it might deserve a different name. For example, I think it's through a change to Taft-Hartley that we do away once and for all with so-called right to work in this country.
How do you do that with such a divided government?
Great question. I'll tell you Plan B, and then I'll tell you Plan A.
Okay.
All right, Plan B is to remember this fact, that the American people are with us on issue after issue, on raising wages, on delivering paid family leave. By the way, we did that in South Bend. Now, the state of Indiana wouldn't let me do it for our community, so I just did it for our city workers. We raised the minimum wage, we set up paid family leave, we delivered it, and then challenged other employers to join as we led by example. But that was as far as I could go because the state wouldn't let me, which is why we need federal law on paid family leave. But anyway, whether it's wages, family leave, whether it's immigration reform, even stuff where my party's been on defense, like gun reform, where actually most Republicans and most gun owners agree we got to do something. On issue after issue, especially when it comes to protecting and supporting workers, the American people agree with us, even in more conservative states. And so when there is a member of the House or a member of the Senate getting in the way of an action that would empower and support American workers, I believe the best use of the big blue and white airplane that comes with the Oval Office is to fly it into the home district of that member of Congress or the Senate who's getting in the way of something that's not only the right thing to do, but widely popular, and remind workers and voters in their home state or district about how much daylight there is between them and their representative. See if that doesn't bring their conscience back to them. That's Plan B for how to deal with things like Mitch McConnell's Senate. Plan A is to have a nominee, in my biased opinion. That might be, for example, a mayor from the industrial Midwest who's a little bit outside of Washington. With enough coattails that Mitch McConnell's not in the majority or the Senate at all, and we have a better Congress to work with, and the government's not so divided.
And I would imagine you'd get rid of the graveyard that's in the Senate right now, right?
The Senate's got to change. And by the way, that means a filibuster. Filibuster's got to go because it's being used to get in the way of good policy. Harry Reid, who is very much somebody who I think lived and breathed the life of that institution, has called for the filibuster to come to an end, and I agree with him.
We are seconds away from your closing remarks, but I want to give you your due diligence. And we'd like to hear your closing remarks today from anything we didn't, the two of us didn't cover, or we didn't get to ask you with questions from the audience or via video.
Perfect. What do we have, 30, 40 minutes? Or,
yeah. How about 5?
5. All right, I'll take it. Well, first of all, thanks again for leading this discussion. And thanks to all of you for standing up for workers in this country. It's coming down to this. When that sun comes up, in that picture I painted for you, when that sun comes up over the United States that first day that Donald Trump is no longer president, we're going to have some big problems on our hands. And one of those problems is going to be this economy, where the numbers on a page might look good, stock market might look good, but most Americans aren't feeling it. Most Americans are not getting ahead, having to fight like hell just to hold on to what we've got. Wages are not keeping up with the cost of health or the cost of retirement or the cost of education. Moreover, we are actually living shorter lives. Think about what that means. For the gross domestic product to go up and American life expectancy to go down at the same time. That should not even be possible. That tells you what's broken in our country right now. Now's our chance to fix it. I'm running to be the president who can deliver solutions that will solve those problems and unify the American people. It's that American majority I was talking about that can help us get these things done, that is with us on issue after issue, especially when it comes to working conditions and organized labor and wages and benefits. But we got to hold it together. We know how to fight, but we can't ever get to where we think fighting is the point. We can't ever let it look like fighting's all we got. We got to keep our eyes on what's on the other side of the fight. And I'm determined to be the president who will help us on that day pick up the pieces and move us toward actual solutions. This is what I'm getting at with an idea like Medicare for all who want it. We take a version of Medicare, make it available for every American who wants to get in on that plan. But trust you to decide whether you want it, because if you negotiated passing up wage increases for something better, you ought to be able to keep that too. The important thing is that everybody be covered one way or the other. It's the difference, in my view, on college. I believe that we should work with states and deliver federal funding to make sure college is tuition-free for the first 80% of Americans by income. Then a bit of a sliding scale as you go between 80 and 90. But if you're in that fortunate top 10%, I wish you well. I do. But I think you ought to pay your own college tuition so that we can use those dollars for other things like apprenticeship programs and CTE and stuff that's going to help people thrive in our economy, whether you went to college or not, because you should be able to do well in this economy no matter what. These are the kinds of solutions that help us deal with the issue, bring us together, and move us forward. And one more thing I will promise to you, as somebody who wore the uniform of this country, that you will not see the President of the United States laughed at by the leaders of the world when I am your commander-in-chief. We will be a country that keeps its word, that upholds our values, and that honors our flag. Folks, we should never forget that my party's roots are in standing up for workers and standing up for those who are organizing for a better life. And that is in my heart because I saw in my own hometown the consequences of recklessness by the wrong decisions being made in corporate America. We almost died as a city when the car factories left in the 60s. We were called a dying city at the beginning of this very same decade we're living in now, and now we're growing. It's not been easy, but we're growing jobs, we're growing income, and we're growing population because we came together to actually get something done. I've seen what is possible. Having grown up in a community where the message that went out when I was a kid was success means getting out. Get out if you want to make something of yourself. And as soon as I left, I realized I was from somewhere and knew that I had to come back, come home, and make myself useful. That's my story. And it's what propels me to make sure that every community thrives. I see in this movement that is coming together a chance not only to get rid of the presidency that we're living through right now, but to build an era we're actually going to be proud of. And we could be so proud of what we did working together starting in 2020 to make a better American life for all of us. That is why I'm running. I believe the presidency has a purpose. And the purpose of the American presidency is not to glorify the president. It is to unify and empower the American people. And I look forward to partnering with Teamsters and with organized labor to make that happen every single day. So I'm asking you to caucus for me for that reason. I'm thankful to be with you. I am at your side, and I look forward to what we can do to make history together. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, we're getting there. All right, our next candidate is Tom Steyer from California. Tom is a first-time candidate who's well known in the finance industry because he set up a company and was very, very successful. He's taken that money and basically invested in America. He founded Next Gen America, a nonprofit group that combats climate change, promotes social justice, and increases participation in the democratic process by registering voters. Let's hear it for Tom Steyer.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Steyer, you have said that labor unions are a powerful check on corporations, and these union workers would like to hear how you would incorporate that and why they should vote for you.
Mind if I stand up to answer that?
You can do whatever you'd like.
So, I am running for president for a very simple reason, which is that I think that corporations have bought our government. I think the government has failed, and I think it's specifically not even trying to represent the people of the United States. And so, it's true. We all know it. And so the question is, who is going to take back this government and make it of, by, and for the people? And if we can do that, what does it mean? So for the last 10 years, I have been organizing coalitions of ordinary American citizens to stand up for our rights and to beat these corporations. It started in California, running propositions against oil companies. So for the last 10 years, my first partner in everything I've done politically is organized labor. My best partner in everything I've done politically is organized labor. And I promise you that my last partner in anything I do politically will be organized labor. So together, we've beat the oil companies, we've beaten the tobacco companies, we've beaten monopoly utilities, we've beaten drug companies. I specifically worked in 2012 on 3 propositions, all of them going door to door with California labor unions. One of them was to raise taxes on rich people. passed. One of them was to prevent a proposition that was taking away the political rights of union workers to organize politically. I gave it $500,000. We went door to door together. Prop 32 lost in California in 2012. And the other one that we did together was Prop 39, which was the one that I was pushing the hardest, which was close a corporate tax loophole of $1 billion a year, give the money for working people, for comparable wage people, to fix up the public schools. Passed. We worked on something called Prop M, or it's actually called Measure M in Los Angeles, which I thought was going to create 450,000 comparable wage jobs, but I was told by the mayor of Los Angeles last night that the new estimate is 778,000 comparable wage jobs in Los Angeles County. I've also started a grassroots political organization called Next Gen America, which did two things. It's doing two things, it's done two things. One is organize young people. We did the largest youth voter mobilization in American history last year, which was to go into 38 Republican districts, more than double the turnout of young people, and flip 33 districts from R to D. But the other thing that Next Gen America does is, with national labor unions, we knock on doors of people who don't vote in swing states. With national labor unions, we knocked on 15 million doors in 2016 and 10 million doors last year. When I say labor's my best partner, labor's my best partner. And the other thing I will say is this. If we can take back this government, and I'm telling you, that's why I'm running, take back the government from the corporations, we will get affordable health care. We will get quality public education. We will get clean air and clean water, but we will also get a living wage for Americans. There has been a 40-year war on working Americans, starting with breaking the air traffic controllers in 1981 by Ronald Reagan, including a strong move for so-called, and I hate these words, right to work across this country, that has been an attempt to take away the rights of Americans to organize and represent themselves. And I guarantee you, we're going to have to fight that. It's absolutely wrong. You can look at what it's meant for working people across this country in terms of wages, benefits, and the share of national income. So if you're asking me why you should support me, because you guys have always been my first, best, and last partners, and I will never walk away from the idea of living wage, the importance of organized labor unions to represent American workers, and the knowledge that what's happened over the last 40 years is profoundly unfair, and we should be fighting it and changing it on day one of an administration.
Thanks, Mr. Steyer. We have a video question here from Crystal Mumphrey, and she's a 6-year member of Teamsters Local 743 in the Windy City of Chicago as a worker for Blue Cross Blue Shield. Her issue, of course, is pensions. Let's come back to that in a little bit. The American Legislative Exchange Council is the single most malignant force standing in the way of worker justice in America. It is spawned, strengthened, and related to Citizens United. How do we answer this seemingly unstoppable dark effort in our national politics that's bent on denying collective bargaining rights, secure pensions, and health care accessibility?
Hi, Crystal Mumford, Local 743.
What do you want me to do, Art?
Let's go with Crystal.
Actually, I think you can answer that, and then we'll go back to Crystal.
Hi, Crystal Mumfrey, Local 743. My question is about pensions and retirement security. How can you guarantee that we keep our pensions through retirement? And also for the people that do not have pensions that are part of unions, how can you guarantee or even get them a pension and guarantee that our pensions will not get taken away?
So, Crystal, let's go back a little bit and see why these pensions are so underfunded and why there's such a risk before we start talking about Butch Lewis, which I'll just jump to the chase and say I'm completely for. I know that. But what happened was these companies did not put in the money while they were working in order to pay for their workers' pensions. They put it off and underfunded the pension companies. And then as a result, we have a drastically underfunded pension system where a group of people who've worked their whole lives are risking their pensions going forward because companies have underfunded, and now people think that those pensions, the multi-employer pension fund, is only going to be solvent for the next 9 to 11 years. So Butch Lewis is basically raising money, lending it to the pension system for the next 30 years, making sure that workers get their pensions and then paying the money back. Makes a ton of sense. There's absolutely no reason not to do Butch Lewis. But let me make a different point. This is the same government that bailed out every Wall Street bank in the country in 2009. So explain to me how doing something that keeps millions of workers' pensions that they've earned through their whole life is not worth doing, but bailing out every Wall Street bank is worth doing. That makes no sense. Let me say something else. Look, I know how much of a threat retirement is to working Americans. 3/4 of Americans rely on their Social Security for most of their income. 3/4. Most Americans don't have a sufficient pension plan, including people who get very good wages, don't have a sufficient pension plan, and really come into retirement without the kind of security they need. One of the things that we've said we will do, that I will do as president, is something called universal retirement accounts, where if you put money aside, the government will match it. And the lower your income, the more they'll match it. The idea being, rather than counting on companies to do it, we're also going to encourage but not require companies to do it. But our point is, we give a huge tax break to rich people who save money. Why are we not, that's just money that the government's giving them to save. Why are we not doing that to everybody? Why are we not using the government's money to incent every single person to put money aside and then match it, the way we do through the tax system with rich people? So do I believe that we're going to use Butch Lewis to save these pensions? Yes, I do. It's absolutely necessary. But more broadly, are we going to use the money from the government? And let me say this, I'm somebody who wants to undo all the tax breaks for rich Americans and big corporations. I've been for a wealth tax for more than a year. What's gone on in this country, when I said there's been a 40-year war against working people, take a look at how the money's split up. It's outrageous. 40 years of no raise really for working people. 2 generations. That's never happened in American history. So we're going to have to change that and that's why I'm for a wealth tax. It's like it's not just income, it's even more than that's wealth. So we need more money coming into the government so that the government can have programs to support working people at every stage of their life. And part of that is going to be a universal retirement account that's going to give people much more security when they retire, and is going to rely on the government instead of corporations who won't do it.
We also have another audience question. And Mr. Steyer, this is Sammy Gabriel. Sammy is president of Teamsters Local 320.
Is Sammy here?
Yes, Sammy's here. Sammy Gabriel is president of Teamsters Local 320, a public employees local union in Minnesota. And the issue is a tax on public sector workers, specifically wants to ask and touch upon Janus. Sammy?
Welcome, Mr. Steyer. I'm Sammy Gabriel. I'm a 35-year Teamster, and I'm president of Local 320. Local 320 represents over 10,000 public service employees across the state of Minnesota. This forum is also very important for me personally. I have 3 granddaughters at home watching us today and listening to all these very important future issues. In my home state of Minnesota, we've felt the impact of the Janus decision, as it makes it more difficult for union reps like myself to do my job to stand up for our members and their rights under their contract. This is a dangerous and unjust overreach by the government to stack the deck in favor of the employers, and will not only have detrimental effects on our members, but also the communities they live in. The attacks go beyond the Janus decision. My sisters and brothers in states all over the country are fighting attempts to weaken our unions, from forced recertification elections to limiting what we can bargain at the table. Public employees in this country deserve to have a voice in the workplace. What would you do to stop these attacks on our union members and promote policies that actually support and strengthen unions? Thank you.
Sammy, thank you very much. And let me say, I think that's a critical question for working people across the United States. I mean, Janus is a very specific, I'm sure everybody in this room knows about the Janus decision, basically allowing people who get the benefits of unions to free ride in terms of their dues. And it was a specific attempt to weaken unions, specifically public employee unions, across the country. And as Sammy said, it's part of that 40-year war on the rights of working people to organize and stand up for themselves. And so let's talk about how we're going to reverse that war. First of all, the NLRB is going to have to be, I always say to people, personnel is policy. Who is sitting there, who has access, who's making decisions is critical. So the first thing is the NLRB has got to be administered by people who understand the needs of working people and organized labor, period. That's one. 2, look, there has been an attempt in this country to stack the federal judiciary with radical right-wing jurists who are young. And so we're seeing something going on where this came down to a Supreme Court decision. And Mitch McConnell's ability to prevent President Obama from getting an appointee into the Supreme Court is really determinative in so many decisions, including this one. So when I think about, and in addition, it's not just Merrick Garland, who is the man that President Obama proposed, who Mitch McConnell blocked from any consideration. Believe it or not, Mr. Trump has been able to appoint a quarter of the federal judges in 3 years, because Mitch McConnell blocked President Obama at every level on federal judges, so there was a huge backlog. So in answer to your question, it starts with the NLRB. I would make having concern for working people's needs a requirement for any appointment. I would consider more than 9 judges on the Supreme Court. It's legal to increase the number. We are at a place where a radical right-wing party has tried to take over the judiciary of this country for a generation. And it's happened. I mean, when you think about what's happened under Mr. Trump's administration, this is a huge part of it. radical, anti-union, right-wing judges who are young. And so we're going to have to be very deliberate in pushing back against this. But the other thing that's going on here, to a large extent, look, right to work is a state issue. I'm a grassroots person. We pushed, Next Gen America has worked hard in a bunch of states, including Nevada. Nevada flipped both houses and the governor last fall. It's huge. It's huge. I went to a meeting in January of this year, right after the election, and sat down with a bunch of union organizers. And I said, okay, here's the question. Minimum wage or right to work? Where do we start and what do we do second? Because we've got to flip these states, and there has to be a meaningful answer when we flip them. Because we're going to have to go state by state and do a turnout job, just like For Our Future, which is the Next Gen organized labor door-to-door effort. This is about turning out Americans across the United States of America, winning, and then changing the rules, fighting back against this 40-year war. That's what we need to do, that's what we're going to do, and that's how we're going to turn this around.
Excuse me? He's going to ask you the question.
So thanks, Tom. Back to the question I pitched earlier. We'll go back to it now. ALEC is a cancer on the democratic process and on worker justice. How do we answer this dark effort in our national politics, organized by the Kochs, that's been on destroying collective bargaining rights, secure pensions, and healthcare accessibility, the three main issues we've been talking about here today?
So, if I can reinterpret Art Cullen's question, it would be this. How are we going to take back our government from the corporations who've bought it? How are we going to do that? Look, I have been proposing structural changes to our federal government that no one else who's running will even talk about. I'm for term limits for every congressperson and senator. 12 years. Look, you want bold change? We need new and different people in charge. You know, you think 6 words: Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Chuck Grassley. We need some changes. Look, in Nevada, they have term limits, and they have a majority female legislature in Nevada. New and different people in charge. Look, I actually believe that the American people are way smarter, way braver, and way more compassionate than the politicians. So I'm actually for pushing power back to the American people. I'm for direct democracy. You know, 26 states have the ability for citizens to gather signatures, put it on the ballot, and enough people vote for it. It's law. I'm for that. I'm for direct democracy on a federal level, so that if the Congress won't do it, for whatever reason I don't want to hear about it, then the people can do it. I'm for it. And obviously, I'll say 2 more things. One is, corporations are not people. I know the Supreme Court said it, I don't care. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous to say that a corporation is a person and deserves the political rights of an American citizen. That is what the Kochs and the corporations and all these people hang their hat on. That's how they get to use the dark money. We got to change that, and that's a Supreme Court decision. But also, you know, this is going to be a question of how we describe this. This campaign, to a large extent, every presidential campaign, is about what matters. What do the American people, what do you sitting in this room care about, and what are you going to vote on? And my argument is, and the reason I'm running for president is, everybody in this room, but everybody across America, wants affordable health care and quality public education and clean air and clean water and a living wage. The question is, how are we going to get it? And I believe this election has got to be about taking back the government. That's actually what's at stake. That we have got to expose the Alex of the world, the transparency so people can see. The only reason they get away with it is they do it in the darkness. They do it secretly. Corruption flourishes in the darkness. As president, yeah, I would change every one of these laws, but the first thing I would do is I would expose these people and I would charge them so much money you can't believe them, fine them for breaking the law and taking advantage of the American people.
Mr. Steyer, how would you specifically invest in worker training and apprenticeships programs to produce a highly trained, skilled, and educated workforce to meet the technological needs of our changing economy? As president, not as a businessman, because you've already done it as a businessman.
So, one of the things that's going to be true, and the reason I talk so much about a quality public education, is to let everybody get a chance to go as far as they want in the way that they want. And that includes skilled labor and training for real jobs. And one of the things where I've seen this work really well in my home state of California is in community colleges. They're basically free. It's 48, they really are. It's $48 for a unit. So my point is this: we need a society-wide effort to train young people for quality, skilled union jobs. We need it. Look, I don't know if you know this. I'm a climate bug. I'd make it priority one. If we're going to rebuild the United States of America on an accelerated basis, which, by the way, we have to do, it's going to create literally millions of high-paid union jobs across this country. And we're going to have to train people so they can do those jobs and so that we can rebuild the middle class of this country. And how is that going to happen? It's going to happen through a combination of things. Apprenticeships, we're talking real jobs. We want apprenticeships. We want the community colleges to be part of this. We specifically want unions to be part of this. This is how we're going to build the union labor force, is have people come up, get their training, and get a real job and get paid along the way. So when I think about this, this is critical for us. You know, this is going to be, we've got to go back to the idea of a way for young people to see a path that includes training, that includes work, that leads to a real career of a living wage, good job, one job supports a family, union work. And rebuilding this country is going to give us the chance to do this every single place, and we're going to do it.
Thanks, Mr. Steyer. And why don't you just kind of wrap up for us and tell us your closing argument, as it were.
Okay. You know, I know Art Cullen. He's a dangerous man.
Yeah, right.
Look, we all know where this is going. I don't know if everybody's seen this, but we've seen in the last day, the last 24 hours, where this election is going. Because what Mr. Trump is going to say is the following. You know I'm a criminal. You know I hate 80% of Americans. You know your mother would never let me come to the dinner table. But you can't get rid of me because I'm good for the economy. That's what he's running on. And as Democrats, we're going to have to beat that. Whoever the Democrat is going to have to talk not just about justice, but we need, of course, to restore justice in this country. But we're also going to have to be able to talk about growth, prosperity, and a strong, vibrant, competitive private sector. We're going to have to be able to take this guy on, go right at his strength, and show that, in fact, as a business person, he failed. He was a fraud. He was a failure as a business person. And then we're going to have to go and show that as the steward of the American economy, he's once again using us as his latest Atlantic City casino. And look, I spent 30 years building a business from nothing. I didn't inherit anything from my parents. I started in one room with no windows in it. I can take this guy on the economy because he is a fake. If you think about what prosperity is in this country, think about the people in this room. The prosperity in the United States of America is the people of the United States of America succeeding together. That's investing in you. It's investing in people like you across this country. And that is how, over time, you build prosperity. You educate people, you provide health care, you have a living wage so families can continue to prosper, you clean up the air and water, you have a country that leads the world morally. That's success. If you look at the last 40 years of America, they would tell you it's successful, but for 90% of America, it isn't. And that's the truth. And whoever's the Democrat is going to have to be able to talk not just about justice, about redistributing wealth, because we're going to do that, but is going to have to be able to talk about growth, about the ability of America to do new things better, and to put people to work at good paying jobs in the real world of the 21st century. We're going to win this. Seriously. We're going to take these guys down.
Now, last but not least, Senator Bernie Sanders is here. All right. Senator Sanders has been a member of Congress for 3 decades, and in the House and in 2007 in the Senate. He's got a great message, and he's most importantly involved in making sure we save our pensions. He is a sponsor of the Butch-Lewis Act. Let's hear it for Senator Bernie Sanders.
Senator Sanders, welcome to Cedar Rapids and the Teamsters Forum.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you just tell the folks in the House why a Teamster ought to vote for Bernie Sanders?
Well, first of all, congratulations for staying awake all day. And I gather I'm the last, and I'm sure you're delighted to hear that. Let me just say this. There are some very good candidates running for President of the United States, and many of them are friends of mine. But I think at the end of the day, if you study the record, you will find that there is no candidate running for President of the United States who is more pro-labor than Bernie Sanders. I have been in the Congress, the House, and the Senate for a long time. I have a pro-labor voting record of 100%. But it is not just how you vote. I have been on more picket lines with striking workers than I suspect all of my opponents combined. That is what I do. Now, some of my friends and colleagues talk about being pro-worker, and it's good, but they voted for some of the worst trade agreements in the history of this country. I am proud to tell you that not only did I vote against NAFTA and PNTR, but I led the effort against those disastrous trade agreements. And as president, we are going to have a policy of fair trade, not unfettered free trade. And that means we're not going to have American workers forced to compete against desperate people around the world who are trying to make it on $1 or $2 an hour. And by the way, when large corporations decide to throw American workers out on the street, when they give their CEOs 100 times more in salary than they pay their workers, and then they get online to try to get a federal contract, well, they've got another guest coming. Ain't gonna happen. If we are going to end the 45-year-old decline of the American middle class, where today, in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality, where 3 people on the top own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, if we are going to do that, we're going to have to rebuild the trade union movement in this country. There are millions of workers in America today who want to join a union but are unable to do so because of the illegal acts of their employers. And that is why I have introduced the Workplace Democracy Act, which is the strongest pro-labor legislation ever introduced in the modern history of this country. And what it says, very briefly, what it says, if 50% of workers in a bargaining unit plus one sign a card saying they want to join a union, they will have a union. And if the employer refuses to negotiate a first contract, there will be serious penalties against that employer. And our legislation ends Section 14B of Taft-Hartley, which will end all so-called right-to-work laws in this country. That's right. And I know all of you are concerned about the multi-employer pension plan. And I want you to know, working with Jimmy, we worked together and we had meetings in the Capitol, that working together, what I tried to do is to stop that disastrous provision in the omnibus bill. And I ended up voting against that omnibus bill precisely because I will not tolerate workers losing pensions when they had paid into that pension plan for their entire work life. In recent years, we have taken on Amazon, I've taken on Disney to raise the minimum wage there to at least $15 an hour. And we have introduced the legislation in Congress for a $15 an hour minimum wage and equal pay for equal work for women. So I'm here just to say this. To me, being pro-worker, pro-union is not a new idea. I didn't poll test it. I've been doing it my whole life. My job as president is not to say, well, on one hand, we got the corporate interest. On the other hand, we got the workers' interest. That ain't my style. If elected president, we're going to have a workers' government in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Senator, we have a question from one of our members via video. This question is posed by Trish Muir. Trish and members of Local 104 are on strike at Asarco Mining at the Mission Complex in Arizona. And her question, is about trade policies that work for workers. Senator, you can watch it right there.
Hi, my name is Trish Muir. I'm with Teamsters Local 104, and I'm coming to you from the Asarco strike line in Tucson, Arizona. My question for you is, if elected president, how will you enforce trade agreements and protect collective bargaining rights, especially as they pertain to the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement? Thank you.
One day longer?
One day longer! Those guys have been on strike now for several months, is that correct?
They've been on strike for a while, yes.
All right. As I indicated earlier, current trade agreements have been written behind closed doors by the CEOs of large corporations. That's just a fact. And unions and workers have been kept out of those negotiations. And the theory behind unfettered free trade is that it's just wonderful. Isn't it just terrific that we have a great global economy? But behind that theory is the understanding that corporations can make a hell of a lot more money by paying workers $2 an hour rather than $30 an hour. And I will never forget, as long as I live, when I was in the House in opposition to NAFTA, we went down to Mexico in the Macadillo area. Do you know what that is? That's the special place near the border in Mexico where they welcome foreign factories. And I went down there. Never forget this, Maquiladora area. You go there and these beautiful factories, General Electric, you name it. And then you find beautiful, modern, state-of-the-art factories. And then you walk a half-mile away to where the workers were living. They were living literally in cardboard shacks. Well, as President of the United States, I'm going to stand up for workers abroad, and I'm going to stand up for workers in the United States of America. We don't believe in a race to the bottom. Right now, if you can believe this, the average worker in America today, after 45 years of an increase in worker productivity and explosion of technology, every one of you is producing far more than workers did 45 years ago. And yet the average worker today is not making a nickel more in real inflation accounted for wages than he or she did 45 years ago. It is time that we had a government that stood with the working class of this country and not just wealthy campaign contributors, and I will be that president.
Senator, you talk about workers' rights, and you talk about that you say you've done more for labor than any of the other Democratic candidates. If you are elected president, how do you reverse the demonization of unions and union workers that has taken place, especially by the right and this current administration?
Well, the truth is, you're absolutely right that for 45 years, we have seen a concerted effort to break unions, to weaken unions, to demonize unions. But despite all of that, because so many working class people in this country are struggling economically, despite all of that, unions today are more popular than they have been for many, many decades. And what you are also seeing now is workers standing up and fighting back in a way that I have not seen for a very, very long time. You have teachers teachers in conservative states who are saying to their governors, don't give tax breaks to billionaires and cut education in our states. You have nurses standing up fighting for their own patients. So I think despite the demonization and the attack against the union movement by the right wing and corporate America, the American people understand one very simple fact. They don't need a PhD in economics to understand it. If you are a member of a union in America today, you make a hell of a lot more work, and you have better benefits, and you have more dignity on the job. And the legislation that we have introduced anticipates that we will double the number of people in unions in a 4-year period, because we're going to open the door for workers to be able to join unions and stop the illegal activities of their employers in preventing that.
Thank you, Senator. I'm especially delighted to call on a questioner here from Cedar Rapids, who Stephanie Griffin is a member and an employee at Teamsters Local 238, and her father, Lawrence Koch, is a member and retiree of Local 238, and her issue is pensions.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for being here today. As I already stated, my name is Stephanie Griffin. I am a proud Teamster member, and this handsome man next to me is my dad, a proud Teamster retiree. He has 30 years of service as a truck driver. He first started working for Hubbard Feeds. He would deliver animal feed to various customers over a 4-state area. When I was a little girl, there were times that I got to go ride along with my dad. And it was really awesome to ride in that big truck. I still remember the smell of the animal feed. I love that smell. I don't know if anybody else here in Iowa feels that way, but I do. And it meant a lot to watch him work so hard and have pride in his work, and I will never forget those experiences. Hubbard Feeds eventually closed, and he worked for a bread company as a driver, and he retired from King's Material as a cement truck driver. Over those 30 years, he paid into the Central States Pension Fund so that he could retire with pride and dignity, and that is no longer the future that he sees. I too pay into the Central States Pension Fund and have for 18 years. I should probably be concerned with myself and what I will do to make ends meet if I don't have that pension, but my concern is solely with my dad. Sorry. This truly is a crisis for our family and hundreds of thousands of other families who are looking to lose their pensions and their incomes. Please share your plan to shore up the pension funds so that my dad and thousands of other retirees, including many people sitting in this room, can stop worrying about losing their incomes and their livelihoods and get back to enjoying their retirements.
Thank you so much. All of you have been involved in negotiations with your employer. You sit down and you negotiate a contract. Sometimes you get what you want, and sometimes you don't get what you want. But you know what the deal is. You know what happened when you leave the bargaining table and when you sign the contract. What is particularly outrageous and disgusting about what happened some 5 years ago in terms of the legislation that allowed for massive cuts to people's pensions is that a promise, a fairly sacred promise, made to thousands and thousands of workers, that promise was broken in an incredibly callous way. So in other words, if I negotiate a contract with you and you only get 2%, you wanted 5%, you're unhappy, but you know the deal. But when your father and you are paying in year after year, giving up wage increases, giving up health care benefits, you're paying in because you want to know that when you retire, you're going to be able to retire with security and dignity. And then, through no fault of your own, one day you learn that in the middle of the night, quite literally, as part of a big omnibus spending bill, a provision was put in there which says that pensions could be cut 30, 40, 50%. That is disgusting. That is outrageous. That is not acceptable. You don't make promises to workers. You don't have workers paying in year after year after year and then suddenly have the rug pulled out under them. Now, you ask me what I will do. Well, we have introduced legislation similar to Butch Lewis. It's a little bit stronger. But here is a promise I make to you without the slightest hesitancy. My Secretary of Treasury, under which this whole thing lies, will never allow for a cut to a pension when that worker was promised that pension. It will not happen. And this is a promise that's not that hard to keep. Remember, a couple of years ago, Trump and his friends gave $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% and large corporations. What we're talking about here is a gap of some $30 billion. $30 billion is a lot of money, but compared to $1 trillion tax break for the rich, ain't so much money. So that is $30 billion that we can come up with to make those pensions whole, and I will, in fact, do that. And the reason, as I said a moment ago, that I voted against that omnibus bill was precisely because that provision was in there.
Thank you, Senator. In Iowa, the right-wing legislature funded by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has gutted collective bargaining laws, and public employee unions used to be able to negotiate over 17 categories. Now they've reduced it to one, pay only. Also in that bill, it makes negotiating for health insurance actually illegal, even if the local school board or city council wants to negotiate health insurance, it's illegal. Doesn't that really obviate the need for single payer as you propose?
Well, two things. Number one, the labor law legislation that I have introduced will allow any worker in America to go on strike when the union wants to go on strike. Now, do we want federal workers to be striking? Do we want state workers? Do we want teachers to be striking? Of course not. We want negotiations to take place by which workers can get a decent contract. But if you take away the right to strike, what leverage does a worker have? Second of all, in terms of health care, let me just say this. And somebody here can tell me if I'm wrong, but I have the strong feeling that every time you sit down at the bargaining table, the key issue that comes up is the cost of health care. Is that right? All right. So the employer will say, well, I can't afford this wage increase because the cost of health care is going up, so you got a choice. No wage increase or we'll cut your health care benefits. Is that kind of what's on the table? All right. We are the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a human right. I believe, given the fact that we have been talking about universal health care in this country since Teddy Roosevelt 100 years ago, FDR, Truman, Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Obama. We've been talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. And right now, the function of our healthcare system is nothing less than to make the drug companies and the insurance companies huge profits. It is time, in my view, to understand that healthcare is a human right, and I will fight and pass a Medicare for all single-payer system.
Senator, you talked about your goal of your plan, workplace democracy plan. You talked about it doubling union membership. You want to do that in your first term as president. You talked earlier about how you'd go about achieving that. But I want to hear, and I think everyone here also does, what effects do you think it would have on our workforce if it is successful?
Right now, in the richest country in the history of the world with a so-called strong economy, half of our workers are living paycheck to paycheck. You all know that? Paycheck to paycheck. People worried about whether they're going to be able to put food on the table, go to the doctor when they're sick, pay their rent. We have millions of people who are working 2 or 3 jobs. I was here in Iowa a few years ago talking to a guy who collects food to give to an emergency food shelf. And I asked him, who goes to the emergency food shelf? Turns out 90% of the people are employed. But here in Iowa, you got a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. How does somebody live on $8, $9, $10 an hour? So when we strengthen the trade union movement, we are raising wages in this country. When we raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, we'll go a long way to ending poverty. When we make sure that women get equal pay for equal work, we'll be raising the salaries of women all over this country. When health care is a human right, every one of us will be in better shape. When we make public colleges and universities tuition free, it means that all of our kids, regardless of the income of our families, will be able to get a higher education, not just college, but trade schools to learn the skills they need as well. What we have got to do ultimately is understand that we are living in a nation which has more income and wealth inequality than at any time since the 1920s. We have a political system which is largely corrupt because it is dominated by billionaires who can make unlimited amounts of campaign contributions and, in fact, are electing candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. What our job is right now in this moment in history is to demand that we have governmental policy that works for all of us, the elderly, the children, the working people of this country, not just the 1% and wealthy campaign contributors.
Senator, lastly, would you grace us with your closing remarks?
Not to get you nervous, because you already know it. We are living in an unprecedented moment in American history. We have a president who is a fraud, who is a pathological liar, who's a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, a religious bigot. A president who went to the American people 3 years ago and he said, you know, I'm going to stand with the working class of this country. I'm a different type of Republican. Hey, I'm not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Remember he said that? Take a look at his budget. Massive cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and cuts to Social Security as well. He's a president, a candidate. 4 years ago, he said, Donald Trump, I'm going to provide health care to everybody. And then he pushes legislation which, if he had gotten 1 more votes, would have thrown 32 million people off the health care they have today. This is a president who lambasts undocumented people. Oh my God, terrible undocumented. Undocumented. He is a guy who has hired undocumented people in all of his resorts. This is a guy who says, I want to create jobs in America. And yet his own companies are manufacturing Trump products in Turkey and all over the world. Hey, Mr. Trump, you want to create jobs in America? Bring your own production back to the United States. We need to do so much in this country in these difficult moments. And it's not just defeating Trump. Obviously, we've got to do that. We got to rebuild the middle class. We got to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. And when we do that, our roads, our bridges, our water systems, we create millions of good-paying jobs. We got to build the affordable housing that our people desperately need. We got to deal with the global crisis of climate change. And when we do that, we create millions of jobs as well. Bottom line is, and what this campaign is about, is telling the billionaire class that their greed is unacceptable. And we are going to take them on. We are going to create an economy. We are going to create an economy that works for the vast majority of the people, not just the people who have the money and the power. So our campaign is about beating Trump. It's about winning here in Iowa. It's about all of those things. But it is about something more. It is about transforming our country, the wealthiest country on earth, so that all of our people have a decent standard of living and can live in dignity and security. And in that goal, I look forward to working with the trade union movement to make that happen. Thank you all very much.
Well, that's the forum. Wasn't that great? Hey, we should do this all the time. I really enjoyed it. I want to thank everybody here in Cedar Rapids and all the people that joined us online. It's been a tremendous effort here. The caucuses are 2 months away. Be sure to participate. People here, make sure you play the role you do. And most importantly, go out and vote, vote, vote. That's what's important. And if you want to